Hello and welcome to this special session at WiT Ignite 2021. We're going to be talking about finding the human connect with conversational AI. And this conversation is going to be with three very interesting personalities who devoted almost a lifetime in this field. Sugandha, Srikanteswaran, Managing Director, Digital Technology Services, India Operations at S&P Global, Rania, Khalaf, the Chief Information and Data Officer at Inari, and Shridhar, Marri, CEO and co-founder at Senseforth. I'm Pranjal Sharma, and I'm delighted that we can address all of you, and you get a sense of what's happening in this wonderful world of ours and all the exciting new changes, which sometimes create anxiety, but are important for all of us to understand what's going on. So I'm going to perhaps begin by requesting Sugandha to help us set the context and tell us, also a little bit about the work that all of you have done. But maybe if I begin with you, Sugandha, and ask you, when we talk about conversational AI, what exactly are we talking about?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. Hope you're continuing to stay safe. Please take all the precautions, right? Okay, conversational AI. I think a lot became aware for the common public through the COVID as well on conversational AI, right? The necessity to actually bring intelligent way of responding to queries, to a virtual agent or to a bot. The whole technology, the whole aspect that comes behind that is conversational AI. It touches upon several pieces, several aspects such as machine learning, NLP, intent recognitions, contextual processing or awareness rather, and the way to actually create a human-like speech or a response. All this is what that makes up conversational AI. And if we look at the market, that's what is happening in many of the services industry. And that's the context for our conversation today. And maybe I'll request the fellow panelists to add more on that.
Rania, how do you see it?
I think part of this, a long time ago, there was a system, Eliza, that you interact with it over your computer, and it was very exciting. It was the first time people were talking to a computer, but there were rules. So if you say certain words or certain phrases, it would kick off a tree, and it really followed through. But now with all the advances that we see in the algorithms, we see that we can have a much more natural interaction with these systems. And it became much more interesting, and it really helps a lot. Like, while in some cases it might be some concerns about it, but if you think about, if I have a question about how to do something in my company or about my health insurance or some things like that, that is really all somewhere in the documentation but hard to find, it makes a lot of sense to have a bot answer it. If the technology is strong enough that it can easily find and respond to me, saves time, makes it faster for me. I don't have to sit on the phone and wait for a human, and also saves time for the provider, that they don't have to, have people just waiting to answer questions of things already known. So there are these areas where it's been really, really useful, like customer service, to have these systems and make it a lot more natural for humans to work with computers. So you don't need a programmer every time you want to get something new done.
So you're saying also that it's making it more accessible, Rania, but let me bring in Shridhar on this. And at any point, Sugandha and Rania, please jump in and add to what has been said. Shridhar, there is also this whole concept of natural language processing, and there's conversational AI. And sometimes for a lot of us who are watching all this from outside, it can get a bit perplexing. Can you help us understand the differences and the applications?
Sure. What drove me so far actually in my life is to understand and how do we actually make technology human-like. So that's the premise with which we've started our company called Senseforth, and it is devoted to sort of solving that problem. It's a large problem, right? So initially, prior to that, I was running large user experience labs for big system integrators, and we realized that all the user experiences that are being built by people for these, for all kinds of solutions are pretty much dumb, actually. In fact, you have to actually learn to do it. It's not natural. It's not like interacting with somebody. Like, it's not like going to a bank and talking to somebody and then getting stuff done, right? But you have to log in, you have to go through, multiple pages and forms, filling, all that, even to do a simple transaction. So at one point we said, okay, what is it going to be? Can we just completely remove this interface and make it zero interface or no interface and make it totally natural language driven? That is the intent. And when we set out to do that, the first thing that we had to crack was, how do we understand a human intent expressed in natural language? For example, if somebody says, I'm going to the bank, okay, we as humans simply understand that he's going to the bank, that's as in physical bank, right? So if somebody says, I'm going to the river bank, it's a totally different context and totally different meaning, right? Now, how do you understand the differences between that bank and this bank? So that's where the NLP comes in. Natural language processing is a technology that helps understanding human intent expressed in natural language. So that's number one. Then once you understand the human intent, let's say, I would say, I want to apply for a credit card, or I want to transfer money to my friend, John, tomorrow evening at 5. Now, there is a lot of things there, right? So you need to understand all that and contextualize it and deliver that whole action. That is where the conversational AI as a platform comes in. And there are so many other elements. When you could be, there is voice technology involved, there's a text analytics involved, and there is system integrations with other banking systems involved. There are so many pieces of the puzzle, but essentially what we're saying is the first thing is to understanding the intent and taking action based on that intent. Taking action part is delivered by conversational AI platforms.
So, that's great to know. Let's look at some examples, and I'll probably request Sugandha and Rania to share some examples where you think, a best case scenario where it's really made a difference. So any examples and cases that you'd like to share? Because after that, then we can get into other dimensions of how we move ahead. So
Absolutely.
Perhaps Sugandha, you, and then Rania.
Absolutely. I can share my own two practical experiences, right? One is in the automotive space. So if you see a lot of our cars today are equipped with intelligent systems, and let's take the very simplistic one where you're trying to get to a restaurant, right? You are given suggestions in a voice speaking to you. Okay, I see on the way to the restaurant, a bookshop, only because I have at some point expressed interest that I'm liking to read this kind of book, and maybe there's a launch. So I have seen my car speak to me, kind of tell me that, hey, there's a bookstore here. And yes, there are some brick and mortar bookstores. We are not always running to Amazon to buy them. But do you want to stop by? So the car is trying to speak. That's because it's trying to mimic that human style of trying to tell me, like how I would tell my friend or someone, right? So that is one example I have experienced firsthand. The second one I want to say is to show how this is becoming de facto or mainstream, right? Like if you see the productivity tools that we use, like any of the word processing or spreadsheet processor, it's like a natural thing today. You're talking about, putting forth a proposal, you bring up a presentation or a processing document and you go about it. I was launching an event for my company in India. And given that event was going to run only for 2 weeks, I knew there will be so many queries coming. Now, the instant thing that comes to my mind is, if only I can build a knowledge base and feed to a bot, and I can have it respond to some of these queries, because there are people who work in night shift and the team may not be around, right? So we started doing that, and then we would govern every day and update the kind of responses the bot can give. And, it used exactly what Shridhar was sharing, right? The NLP engine that was being used to understand what the employees were asking, and also responding. It didn't give too much of a human-like response because we built it very quickly with the knowledge base we had, but it's become something like you're thinking by default now. That's the way this has actually evolved. Has it perfected? Maybe not, but I think there's scope for it. So I just thought I'd share this because this was very, very exciting for us. Short-term things, how does conversational AI really benefit?
This is a great example. And coming to Rania, you've had this huge and fantastic career in automation as well. The whole idea of somebody else taking decisions for you or guiding you, it can also be a bit scary. But in your view and your experience, where are we right now? Are we at an inflection point where it explodes for use and gets deployed into different sectors, becomes mass, as it were? Or do you think that there is some way for us to go before the technology matures and it gets absorbed in our daily lives?
I think we have to use these technologies for what they're good at and let the humans do what they're good at. And as things get better and they improve, we see more and more done by the automation, but only where it is better and where it makes sense, because we're all after doing, better work faster so that we can focus our energies on the more high value targets. I really think there are some things that the technology has been good enough and these machines are really good at that is really enabling people. So I'll give you an example. If I want to search data or get insight into data, it has been traditional that I have to go, if I'm in line of business, I have to go to the central IT. I have to ask for a developer who can build me a dashboard to get certain things out of my data so I can view it. One of the advances in NLP lately has been work around natural language to query translation. So it understands the schema of the data, and then when you say something, then it is translating that to a structured SQL query or other kind of query on the data, depending on the data type. So now anybody can kind of ask question of a database without requiring tech skills. So this is opening a lot of new doors and making things much more accessible. For me, do I want a conversational AI to be my best friend or to, help me solve a complex problem with my credit card? No, but if I'm just trying to ask my statement account or when is the next due date or something like that, then it does this really well because the technology is good enough.
Yeah, and if I may just build on one point that Rania mentioned, right, about the search, I think that's one big thing that we're noticing as a guarding requirement, but also as a positive outcome, right, of conversational AI. There is a certain source or a base that we build to get the conversation going, but then there are answers out there which are not pre-thought of. So how the conversational AI, the platform actually brings that into the context is another interesting aspect that's being ventured into, and that needs actually the guardrails, like what Rania was saying. Yeah.
I'll come to guardrails and the cautions in a minute, but Shridhar, from the perspective of a emerging economy or a developing country like India, there's also a lot of chatter and hope that voice-based commands can help build a far more inclusive society. It in some ways reduces the digital divide and enables several categories of communities to interact and get the benefits of digitization. Do you agree with that? Do you see that happening?
Absolutely. In fact, today we are working across sectors. There are a ton of use cases in banking, healthcare, manufacturing, telecom, retail, everywhere, right? Beyond that, I think the conversational AI is going to be all pervasive. Tomorrow, I think you would be able to speak with your appliances, and speak with your car, speak with anything, or your home, or even a government office, everything. So now, from a digital divide perspective, there's a lot happening. In fact, we are working with Government of India. We've been selected as one of the key partners in creating, in sort of automating citizen services using conversational AI. That means you want to find out your Aadhaar status, or your passport status, or something else, whatever the government. There are hundreds of government services at the state and the federal government levels, and when we are working with the government of India to automate all that. So what it does essentially is that so access to technology becomes frictionless. So anybody with a phone can actually, dial the number and ask a question saying, okay, I need A positive blood. Is there a blood bank with A positive blood right now? And then our conversational AI driven virtual assistant will respond and say, hey, it's available on MG Road in this particular hospital. So that is the kind of power that conversational AI has.
That's fantastic. In fact, the phrases affordable and accessible are so critical for nearly everybody. And I don't know, Sugandha and Rania, you want to come in on this issue of does then conversational AI have that capacity to go at a scale where it really builds accessibility and affordability to technology across communities? And it's not just about India. I would say hundreds of millions of people who are waiting to join the digital mainstream. Conversational AI could possibly be a very important factor and a force.
Sure. Rania, do you want to give it a shot? I can
Sure. So, we talked a bit about conversational AI for question answering, right? The next step that's been now, broached is action. So can I get things done by conversing with these computers? Like, can I send an application for something or kick off an approval for something? And then what's coming next after that, I think, is can I kick off something that leads to a sequence of steps happening? And what could that be from this utterance? So it's a bit like programming by talking, let's say. All of that, even the first one, right? It is really removing the barrier from requiring IT skills from access to data and information, right? As Shridhar was just mentioning, right? Where before you may need someone with a computer to help you navigate and understand where the website structure is and where that information is sitting, and maybe even to reach into these blood bank data, which may not be accessible. Nobody may have built an interface and nobody spent the time to create an app for it. Now, by creating a conversational AI front end, right, you enable so much freedom in how people navigate that data and what access they have. So you don't have to pre-imagine all the things that could be asked of it. So I think that really opens up the access to information and capability to people that may or may not have tech skills. And honestly, even for me, I have really good tech skills. I can create conversational AI bots myself, but I love that, I can just, in some cases, just say, I'll give an example. In my previous job, right, I could just say, please move this employee's office from this building to that building, and it would figure out what systems to call and so on, because the other system where I had to go with many drop-down lists and whatever was so complicated and took many, many steps, right? So it was just easier for me to tell it what to do.
I'll touch on the scale aspect, right? So you were asking, how can we really have the scale? And I think that's what cloud has brought to the forefront. Mm-hmm. So I think many of us back in our college days did have an elective on neural networks. So we got exposed to all of this long back, but because the processing power was very limited, we did not have the opportunity to try the ML running at this scale and getting the responses out. So I think today, two things. One is the cloud and the edge. They both are actually making it possible to get the information across to people. The second thing I do want to add, based off of what Shridhar was saying, right? At least in the India context, to reach people far and in their language, I think that's an effort being made. And if you see any of the leading enterprises or any of the platforms, everybody is busy sourcing the language-based translations and language-based parsing so that they can actually include that as part of the solutions. And these are again made available, right, for others to consume. So I think through these two aspects, we are trying to reach a broader population, and the divide that you mentioned is probably actually thinning. That's what I would think.
No, that's great. Yeah, but it also means that, sorry, Shridhar, go ahead.
I was just saying, a lot of these, departments or government departments have these digitization programs. Let's say applying for driving license is fully digitized, but actually, if you go to the RTO offices, there are these little computer shops where people line up, and there is a guy who is a computer operator helping them fill the forms online, which is a sad part, right? Now, the conversational AI can completely remove that and say, these guys can you can actually apply for driving license or, get it renewed or do anything just using conversational AI with just your phone. So that, and of course, and as Sugandha was saying, once you throw in the multilingual aspect of it, it is a completely different dimension. I think the scale is phenomenal there. Now, then the next step, of course, the simple queries to complex tasks, and then the next is more personalization. Then that personalization is where the magic happens, in the sense that if I don't like the color, let's say green or red or brown, then if I'm doing if there's some shopping I'm doing with a conversational AI assistant, and then and the suggestions that are thrown at me are not inclusive of those colors, then that becomes more personalized. Or when I on my calendar, there is a flight booking, and my personal virtual assistant, if it could, hail a cab or book a cab 30 minutes prior, then that becomes a lot more personalized.
Well, I just hope it can do something like making sure that the cab driver doesn't refuse to go to the place I really want to go. I need that power from my AI voice as well. But it's also important to understand, that there is clearly a lot of interesting opportunities coming up there. So if I'm looking, and for those of you who are interested in a career in this, do you really need a science background or a technology background to be a important player in this segment? Perhaps Sugandha and Rania, and then Shridhar to come in on this. I mean, what kind of skill sets are required if one were to look at a career in this space? Sugandha?
Sure. I wanted to answer something which is not technical, and I'm going to let my friend Rania add a lot on the key or essential skills, right? This is something I've realized over the last few years, ever since AI became very, very transformational and popular, right? The whole question of explainable AI or concept of explainable AI, fair AI became relevant, and it's also becoming popular. So I started thinking, what does it mean? What kind of background will actually bring forward the compliance that is needed when we roll out any of the AI solutions? So I think even if someone is not into the mainstream ML development or developing those parser algorithms, I think if you have an understanding of how a domain, say if it is the banking sector, and which is a regulated industry, right? So how does the domain work, and what would it mean to modify or align them to the new technology or outcomes based on AI? How can we make sure nothing is going wrong and it's being governed? I think someone with background of both compliance as well as understanding how regulated industry work can actually come and make a big difference, even though they have not, majored in any of the AI disciplines from a technology angle. That's one thing I do want to share, and something which I felt is very important. Other than that, I'm going to request Rania, who comes from a very strong research background, to help our folks understand what else would be needed.
Thanks, Sugandha. Just building on what Sugandha was saying as well. So first, there is what you would expect, right? Traditional machine learning and ML and data skills. That's one piece. But then you can think of building these systems really takes a team, right? So it doesn't mean you have to be good at all the skills that are there. You could provide one of them. And some understanding of the others is beneficial, but you can be an expert in one or a couple of them, right? So do not feel you need all these skills to do conversational AI, but if you can bring to a team some of the skills where the others have the complementary ones, then you can build a successful product or have a real impact in this space. So one is the obvious one, right? Machine learning, data, some cloud computing background, etc. That is the base compute space. In addition, because conversational AI works with humans and the human factor is really central to the success of these systems, then we see also a lot of interest in what is being called as human-centered AI. And this is the field of human-computer interaction. And here we see people with background in sociology. We see people with a background in, Sugandha mentioned the domain. We see a lot of work around fairness and understanding regulations. So for those skills, this is not the traditional ML algorithmic skill set. And it is really, really critical, because if these systems don't work well with humans and alongside humans, they are going to fail. Right? Yeah, you could have the best algorithm, but if it doesn't feel natural and understand when people are getting frustrated with it, or understand when it's making the wrong choices, then this is going to be really bad. So I think it's really important to have these complementary skill sets that are really focused on the human aspects as well.
That's good to know, because a lot of people feel that this is all about, young folks sitting in a basement with a hoodie and clattering away on the keyboard, and those are the guys who create everything. But the word domain knowledge is so critical. And Shridhar, the way you work with the government agencies at various levels, national, state, local, regional, it means you clearly need to have a multidisciplinary field to be able to deliver on a simple solution, right?
Absolutely, you said it. And I think conversational AI is probably one of the most multidisciplinary fields out there. We hire a lot of technology folks, but apart from that, we've also created new job roles. Something like conversational experience designer. It never existed before. So this is not a design. This is not a traditional design role, or or a traditional content role, or a traditional domain role. It's a mixture of domain plus content, and somebody who can write well, somebody who can actually weave those experiences well, and that's a hot commodity right now in this industry. Apart from the technical roles. And of course, there are behavioral scientists, user researchers. There are so many layers, and then so many different job roles that are emerging in the field.
That's again important to understand, that once you have an objective in mind, then it's really to put the right kind of team together to deliver. Let's look at some of the concerns around this. While there is a lot of excitement, I'm worried, for example, if I'm using voice for a lot of this, somebody's storing my voice somewhere, right? And in a world that somebody can play my voice on a phone and get various transactions done, I'm not even supposed to be there. So in the world where deepfake is now becoming a fairly mainstream activity, how do you think that conversational AI, what kind of frameworks are required to ensure that it's not abused and it's channeled in the right direction? Rania, I'll begin with you and then come to Sugandha.
Yeah, this is a really, really good question. I think with any new technology, right, how you regulate it quickly comes to bear. And if you deploy it too soon, what havoc can it wreak? It's an important question. I think with these things, it really depends on where you deploy it and what you allow it to do. And then on top of that, like any other system with an API, how are you setting up the authentication and the access rights on top of it? So you have to treat it like any other software system if you're the person providing this service. And if you're a consumer of it, you have to have a clear understanding of, what are you signing up for? What are the terms of use, and what are you authorizing, as you would with any other service? I know there was a lot of concerns with some of the devices in the homes that are using voice, for example, right? Like, are they recording when we're not asking them to? What do they do with our data? And we all know it's being used to improve the service, which we like to have a better service. And then we put our faith in some of these companies that they will hopefully do the right thing in the interim until the regulation comes, because they want our business and we are, educated consumers that care about the technology. So it's really a fine line. I think for the chat ones, it's a bit easier because you are working on a computer and you can put the usual checks and balances in place, accessing that chat as you would accessing a website, right? And we all know how to password protect and do two-factor authentication and things for things you could do in a website. So you could bring some of that to bear. For voice, it becomes a little more complicated, especially if it's ambient, like if it's in the background, there are some devices and you're not sure who walked in. How do you get consent from everyone who walked into the room that this thing can record them? How are you aware what devices are in a room when you walk into a new space that is not your space? Those are all really open questions, but they're there with any new technology. There are always these questions about adoption and regulation and safety.
I think, the whole thing that comes up saying that, oh, AI, it's going to replace the humans and stuff like that. I think this is where it actually keeps you grounded, because human intelligence is what is going to tell what I will allow for the system to, listen from me, or allow me to actually take advantage of. For example, this famous device that we probably most of us have at home, right, which tells us the temperature or tells a joke. My daughter is very excited about it. So every now and then she would go and say, hey, tell me a joke. So when I first configured and got it running, my whole question was, what if it responds something which is inappropriate for my daughter, right? So that was the most important thing. So my only way to control at that time was that she was accessing or talking to it when I am around or when my husband is around. But I don't think that's possible always, right? So I think as parent, we then start reviewing, the analytics of sorts that the system provides to see, okay, what kind of questions are asked, what can I restrict, but still you cannot restrict a lot of that. So I think providing a framework where people take the responsibility to some extent, because every invention has its boon and bane. So how do we become responsible in using it? And like Rania said, you won't know everything. Like sometimes you are in an environment, especially these days, it's a cool thing in restaurants or any other place, right, to kind of present what is going on, and there's someone clicking a picture and you're there and everything is happening, right? So I think it is more about being responsible, being mindful about what will be accepted or not. I think that is important. The second thing is, again, the checks and balances. If we were to extend the way systems are being organized today, data is being organized, I think there's careful review done to say what kind of access should be given to whom. Even in a company, if you really look at, say, employee data, not everybody has access to it. So even today, when queries are being asked, there's a group of people who get access. So, access-based restrictions are becoming important. Similarly, when the search returns a response, these kind of checks and balances are put in place. I'm sure Shridhar probably has more to add on this.
In fact, sometimes the technology itself offers some very interesting, phenomena. For example, voice biometrics is something that is emerging space, which, each of our voices are very, very unique, right? So that they can actually become identity. Because the pitch and the tenor and a whole bunch of things in the voice are different. So you can use the voice biometrics and authenticate a user, a real user and a fraudster. So that's one thing. Now, of course, the points are, in fact, maybe there could be, certifications designed around conversational AI, that voice interfaces or text interfaces. I know there are pieces of software at the end of the day, but still there are specific certifications that we have for other things. But even for conversational AI, and I would think that newer kind of certifications would emerge, which would qualify something as secure.
When you say, everybody, you're all talking about what can be done. Is anything being done? Because if you're using conversational AI, you're also recording and storing the voice, right? And voice is the biometrics, same as retina scan and fingerprint scan. They are all being stored somewhere. Who's guarding those? Who's ensuring that there are rules around the usage? Privacy, of course, is an issue, but the question is that hundreds of companies and startups are using this in various different ways. What is the common ground for them in terms of the rules that we need to have? What is the ethical framework that they are going to be working on? How do you harmonize and ensure that all companies work on a common standard of rules? Is anything happening between regulators, between maybe the industry bodies on this at a global level, and of course at country level? And are there any examples that we need to know about? And perhaps Rania and then Sugandha, you could come in and share any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm the work I've done on conversational AI, I was very much in the science part of it and a bit farther from regulation, but we were doing a lot of work on fairness and on ethics of AI and helping to create, at IBM Research, we were creating something called AI fact sheets together with Alexandra Mojsilovic's team, which is like a nutrition label for AI. So, can you tell me what data it was trained on, what it does, how it was, quality checked, what metrics does it do, audit them, or for people who want to use them to understand how they were created. So we are seeing a lot of movement on that also, from Microsoft and from others. There's more and more of a movement also about the data that's being used, certifying that. And there is, so we do see some movement, and we also see some movement in regulatory bodies and governments where we had been participating to help to put these rules and boundaries about how AI is being used. Some of it wasn't specific to conversational systems really, so I don't think we're there yet. Even just think about a much simpler problem, our pictures, right? Pictures been around for a long time. People are still, Creative Commons was wonderful because it made it very easy for people to understand how pictures or how data might be used that they put online in a very simple, consumable way, and you don't have to read 10 pages of terms and conditions that nobody read because either you accept or you don't, and it's all legalese. So, but even with pictures, just recently there was this big thing on the news that there was an actor here in the US where his picture accidentally ended up in a database of images for stock images, right? These stock images any company can take and use for commercial purposes, and they just pay the fee to the stock image catalog or to them, and they can use it. So this famous actor found himself on billboards and in ads for product for cream, face cream. He never authorized it, right? And okay, he didn't care, he has his own money, he's not going to be upset, but this is something as it's not even any fancy AI here. It's just a digital media of ourselves that, got into the wrong place and under the wrong permissions. And he has no way to relay back. It's not clear how it got there to begin with. So I think this problem has many layers, and we see it in much simpler technology too. And we're all trying our best, and the regulation is evolving, right?
So that's important, Sugandha. You mentioned that as an example, Rania, but to Sugandha, my question would be that, there could be a situation, Shridhar referred to, a new class of people joining in, and somebody can talk about their bank account and details on a voice interface, and all that gets recorded and is stored somewhere. Now, who's responsible for that then? How do you manage that situation?
Yeah, so two things, right? And Shridhar also mentioned this. So conversational AI, contextual awareness and personalization, that is differentiating the whole aspect, right? But to do that, there are a few things that come in play. One is consent, and second is all the data protection bills and laws that are being published country-wise. So if you actually see what GDPR brought from Europe, right? Where will data be stored? Who will have access? Who can control? Who can process? That brought a stringent aspect and view to it. Similarly, in India, the PDP, the personal data protection, is going to drive some of those. See, a lot of the conversational AI success is based on the data that is present. And then, like we spoke, bringing the history in context in context, pun intended. So I think those are what is going to actually provide the sense of, I wouldn't say 100% comfort, but yeah, almost there. And remember, we are giving the consent. So like with any technology, you go for a scan, there is going to be some effect of it. As long as you know what is the effect and it is minimal, you're going to go for the scan because you're going to solve a bigger problem. Similarly, with conversational AI, you're going to be aware of where, what, how it will be stored, and then you're going to take the decision to accept and continue the conversation. Maybe Shridhar can add more on that.
Yeah, so I think we're going to be ending in the next couple of minutes. And so Shridhar, the question to you is, and you work at that level where I can pose this question to you, that concept of, consent and privacy is not as prevalent as we think. There are several communities or classes and categories of people for whom, this is not a concern, because you live in a situation where you share your information freely in the real world, and therefore why should it be any different in the digital world? So in countries like India, where concept of consent for data sharing and privacy have not percolated to every level, we need to look at some serious guardrails or some kind of a framework to ensure that to make this popular, while we scale and bring it to masses, we also have to protect them. And I think which is where your experience of working with the government and various such bodies would be important.
Absolutely. In fact, I would see it as a a three-layered problem. One is at the regulatory authority level, there could be some very broad overarching kind of principles, because we don't want them to be like enforcerate kind of a regulation, because that sort of kills the entrepreneurship and everything. The second layer is the organizations, the companies at their level. There has to be serious frameworks based on which you deliver work, whether it is bias creeping or explainability, a whole bunch of things. I think we are working on a framework for our own organization, and for all the solutions that we deliver would flow through that framework, and we can publish that framework. People can actually audit us on that. So you could have third-party audits that we can bring in to sort of make sure that you're really complying with your own set of regulations. That's the second part. The third part is people at the people level, whether there's consent or not, they need to be careful and more cautious in what they're sharing in whatever media. Especially, one of my friends, from the time his child was born, every picture, every activity, everything for the last some 12 years is on Facebook. So I mean, so in fact, I was just wondering, when she is 18 or whatever, 20, and all her entire growth history can be actually ascertained from Facebook, which I don't know whether she would like it. So there is a lot of caution, and especially with a lot of platforms like WhatsApp and messaging platforms and so many things. That is another thing that people they need to exercise caution at themselves. And the third thing is the banks and stuff like banks and regulatory or a lot more insurance and kind of sectors. We need to rather than actually putting stuff on the cloud, they could be deployed on-prem so that the data is more secure.
Thanks, Shridhar and Rania and Sugandha. This is a conversation which we could go on for another hour or so at least, but there is so much happening that I think even if we come back 2 months later, there'll be new developments and new exciting ideas which have come up, and new applications and deployments. So I guess the only suggestion we could have for the audience and everybody who's keen, who's already participating in this space or is keen to get into, is that just lean into it, understand what's going on. Being a technology oriented person is not important. It's really what you can bring to forming a solution, which is important. And to close on the point that all of you made, we need the guardrails, but it's going to be a multidisciplinary approach, which is going to make sure that conversational AI is really delivering on the promise of the digital revolution. So thank you once again to all of you for joining us for this chat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.